The radio crackled through the howling storm. Mayday! Mayday! SEAL Team Delta, requesting immediate extraction. The voice was barely audible above the hurricane's fury, desperation cutting through static. We are pinned down, taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Commander James Reynolds pressed his back against shattered concrete, blood streaming from a gash above his eye. Around him, his SEAL team fought for survival in the abandoned shipyard that had become their killing field. The Category 4 hurricane that had been forecast as a tropical depression had exploded into a monster, turning their routine reconnaissance into a desperate fight for survival. "Command, this is Delta Actual," Reynolds shouted into his radio, ducking as concrete exploded near his head. "Enemy forces significantly larger than intel suggested. We have at least 3 squads with heavy weapons. Martinez is hit. Need immediate extraction." Only static answered. The storm had created a communications blackout. They were alone. "Sir," Petty Officer Jackson shouted from behind an overturned forklift. "RPG team setting up at your 2 o'clock. Reynolds spotted them. 3 men preparing to launch a rocket-propelled grenade at the shipping container where half his team had taken cover. Thompson and Willis were there, both wounded with no chance to move. A single shot cracked through the tempest. Reynolds flinched instinctively, expecting to feel the impact. Instead, through his tactical binoculars, he saw the RPG operator collapse, a perfect hole through his forehead. Before the other team members could react, 2 more shots rang out in rapid succession. Both men dropped. "What the hell?" Reynolds whispered, scanning the storm-darkened horizon. Another shot rang out. Another enemy fighter fell. Then another. "Who's shooting?" Jackson asked, voice filled with confusion and hope. Reynolds adjusted his night vision goggles, trying to locate their mysterious savior. Nothing. Only rain and darkness and the silhouettes of abandoned factory buildings looming against the raging sky. "I don't know," Reynolds replied, "but whoever it is, they're hitting targets at extreme range and hurricane conditions." He shook his head. "That's impossible. No one can shoot like that in this weather." Little did he know, the impossible had a name. Ghost. Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell wiped condensation from the supply room window, watching storm clouds gather over Fort Bragg. At 32, she carried herself with the quiet efficiency of someone who preferred to remain unnoticed. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, uniform pristine despite the humid coastal air. To everyone on base, she was just another logistics specialist, the woman who processed ammunition requests and maintained inventory spreadsheets. "Sergeant Mitchell," a voice called from the doorway. "Got any 556 left? Range control needs another case." Sarah turned to face Private Jenkins, a fresh-faced recruit who always seemed nervous around her. "Third shelf, second row," she replied, her voice even, betraying nothing of what lay beneath her calm exterior. "Sign here." As Jenkins scribbled his signature, his eyes drifted to a corner where a long black case sat partially hidden behind stacked crates. "Is that what I think it is?" he asked, curiosity overcoming his usual reticence. Sarah's gaze followed his. The case contained her Barrett M82A1, a 50 caliber sniper rifle capable of engaging targets beyond a mile. "Just personal equipment, Private." "You shoot?" Jenkins asked, clearly surprised. A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. "Sometimes." What she didn't tell him, what she never told anyone anymore, was that 3 years ago, she had been known by another name in elite special operations circles. They called her Ghost, the deadliest sniper in the Marine Corps, with confirmed kills at distances other marksmen considered impossible. After Jenkins left, Sarah heard heavy footsteps approaching. Captain William Barrett stood in the doorway, his weathered face bearing the unmistakable signs of decades of service. At 68, the Vietnam veteran served as a senior advisor, respected by all but close to few. "You still balance your rounds by hand," Barrett observed quietly, nodding toward the ammunition boxes Sarah had been inventorying. That's old-school Marine Corps scout sniper methodology, not Army procedure. Sarah froze, her fingers hovering over the ammunition. Few would notice such a detail. Fewer still would recognize its significance. Most logistics personnel don't check weight distribution in standard issue rounds. Barrett continued, his eyes sharp despite his age. Only someone who understands how a 3-grain variance affects trajectory at extreme distances would bother. Sarah straightened, meeting his gaze. Is there something you need, Captain? Barrett glanced at the empty room, then closed the door. Coffee, Sergeant Mitchell. In my office. 10 minutes. Barrett's office walls told his story, photographs spanning decades of service, from jungle warfare in Vietnam to desert operations in the First Gulf War. He poured coffee into 2 mugs bearing the Marine Corps emblem. Frank Wilson was a friend of mine, Barrett said without preamble, sliding 1 mug toward Sarah. We served together in Fallujah in '91. Before that, Berlin, '89, just before the wall fell. Special operations that still don't officially exist in any record. Sarah's composure cracked slightly at the mention of Wilson's name. Master Sergeant Frank Wilson, her mentor, her teacher. The man who had discovered her talent and trained her to become something extraordinary. I know who you are, Sarah, Barrett continued. Wilson wrote to me about you. Said you were the best he'd ever seen. Called you Ghost because you could make shots that seemed supernatural. That person doesn't exist anymore, Sarah replied, her voice tight. I also know why Wilson died in Afghanistan, Barrett said, his voice dropping. And why a sniper with your exceptional talent ended up counting bullets in a supply room. Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her temple, feeling the scar hidden beneath her hairline, the physical reminder of that day. The traumatic brain injury had affected her balance for months. Military doctors had been clear. Her days as an operational sniper were over. The official report blamed Wilson for the mission failure, Barrett continued. Said he changed positions without authorization, exposed himself to enemy fire. But Wilson never made rookie mistakes. You didn't come find me just to talk about the past, Sarah said. Barrett pulled a weather report from his desk. Category 4 hurricane approaching, bases preparing for lockdown. He placed a mission brief beside it. SEAL Team Delta deployed yesterday on a routine reconnaissance near the old Wilmington shipyard. Sarah frowned. In this weather? Mission was approved unusually quickly. Minimal intelligence preparation. Barrett slid a photograph across the desk. My godson, Jake Miller. Part of Delta. Something doesn't feel right. Sarah studied the satellite imagery, her trained eye catching what most intelligence analysts would miss. These movement patterns, she murmured, noting 3 separate groups converging on the shipyard from different directions. This isn't random. It's a classic triangulation ambush formation. Barrett nodded grimly. Communications intercept, deemed low priority by analysts. He played a garbled recording. American visitors expected. Prepare the welcome. Sarah's blood ran cold. Who authorized this mission? Colonel Richard Blackwood. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Blackwood was the senior officer stationed nearest to the position where Wilson and I were attacked in Afghanistan. Barrett's eyes narrowed. After Wilson's death, I started connecting dots. Blackwood has financial ties to defense contractors that don't pass the smell test. Offshore accounts, shell companies. Sarah's mind raced, memories flashing back to Afghanistan. Wilson's suspicions about leaked intelligence. His meticulous notes tracking financial discrepancies in reconstruction projects. The mortar attack that came with unnatural precision. We need to warn them, Sarah said, rising from her chair. Already tried, Barrett replied. Brought my concerns to Major General Thompson. He wants proof before pulling a SEAL team based on suspicions. Then we get proof. Major General Thompson's office buzzed with pre-storm activity. Maps displayed the hurricane's projected path, while officers coordinated evacuation procedures. Sir, Barrett said, The satellite imagery shows a clear ambush pattern. SEAL Team Delta is walking into a trap. Colonel Blackwood stood by the window, his face impassive. With all due respect, Captain Barrett, you're seeing phantoms. These are standard patrol routes for local security forces. Then explain this intercept, Sarah interjected, playing the audio file. Blackwood's expression darkened. Sergeant Mitchell, you're overstepping. Logistics personnel shouldn't access tactical intelligence. Mitchell has relevant expertise, Barrett countered. She has a traumatic brain injury and was deemed unfit for operational status, Blackwood replied coldly. Her assessment is compromised at best. Thompson sighed heavily. Captain Barrett, I understand your concern, especially with your godson in Delta. But Colonel Blackwood is Delta's operational commander, and I need more than suspicious patterns to halt a mission already in progress. Sir, Sarah began. That's enough, Sergeant. Thompson cut her off. Return to your duties. Captain Barrett, you're dismissed. Blackwood, maintain communication with Delta Team. If there's any indication of trouble, I want to know immediately. As they left the office, Sarah caught Blackwood watching her with calculating eyes. He's burying this, she whispered to Barrett once they were alone. Just like he buried what happened in Afghanistan. Barrett nodded grimly. If Delta Team is walking into an ambush, they won't know until it's too late. Unless someone warns them. Barrett studied her face. What are you thinking, Ghost? Sarah's quarters reflected her dual existence. The living room appeared ordinary, standard military housing furniture, a few books, nothing personal. But behind a locked door, her bedroom told a different story. Ballistics charts covered one wall. Another held a disassembled rifle with a custom barrel and trigger. Sarah entered the code to a hidden wall safe, revealing the black case containing her Barrett M82A1. This wasn't standard military issue. This was Wilson's personal weapon, modified extensively throughout his career and given to her after his death. The scope alone was worth more than 3 months of her salary. A Schmidt and Bender PME with custom turrets Wilson had designed himself. She lifted it with practiced ease, the 30-pound weight familiar in her hands. Next came the weatherproof tactical gear, rangefinder, wind meter, and most crucial, Wilson's leather-bound notebook containing years of ballistic data, environmental conditions, and shot records. Sarah reached for the dog tags hanging on a hook beside her bed. Wilson had given them to her just before that final mission in Afghanistan. Promise me, kid, he had whispered, blood seeping through her fingers as she tried to stop the bleeding. Promise me you'll always watch over them. Our people, no matter what. A knock at her door interrupted the memory. Barrett entered, closing the door quickly behind him. Thompson has denied my request to contact Delta, he said grimly. Blackwood convinced him it would compromise operational security. Then we operate outside the chain of command, Sarah replied, continuing her preparations. Barrett watched her work. You understand what this means? Unauthorized departure during hurricane lockdown, unsanctioned combat operation. Your career is over if you do this. Sarah met his gaze. Some promises matter more than careers. Barrett nodded, understanding without further explanation. Base is evacuating non-essential personnel. I can buy you 4 hours before anyone notices you're missing. He handed her a satellite phone. Secure line, untraceable, and this, he placed a 6-digit code on a slip of paper. Will get you through the East Perimeter Gate. What about transportation? Hurricane preparation team left a Zodiac inflatable at the Eastern Drainage Canal. You can take it downstream to within 2 miles of the objective, then proceed on foot. Sarah studied him. Why are you helping me? Barrett's eyes grew distant. Wilson saved my life in Fallujah, provided overwatch for 8 hours while we waited for extraction, never missed a shot, even as night fell. He met her gaze. He didn't know me, had no personal stake. He just wouldn't leave anyone behind. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. That was who he was. I see him in you, Barrett said quietly. He moved to the door, then turned back. Ghost, if you get into trouble out there, remember what Wilson taught you. Trust your training, trust your instincts. He opened the door. And come back alive. That's an order. Rain pelted the base with growing intensity as Sarah made her way toward the eastern perimeter. The maintenance roads were largely deserted, with most personnel already in hurricane shelters. She kept to the shadows, moving with the practiced stealth that had once been as natural to her as breathing. The eastern drainage canal stretched before her, swollen with rainwater, its concrete banks channeling the flow toward the ocean. The Zodiac inflatable was secured to a maintenance dock, partially protected from the wind by an overhanging equipment shed. Sarah quickly loaded her gear, then untied the mooring lines. The small outboard motor coughed to life on the second pull. She steered into the center of the canal, the current immediately catching the boat and accelerating it forward. The rain was coming down in sheets now, reducing visibility to less than 50 yards. But she navigated confidently, having memorized the route. The canal would take her directly east, toward the coastline and the abandoned shipyard where Delta Team was operating. As the boat carried her away from the base, Sarah's mind drifted to her first meeting with Master Sergeant Frank Wilson. Basic training, 8 years ago, the shooting range at Camp Lejeune. She had qualified expert on her first attempt, drawing little attention. She preferred it that way, excellence without recognition. But on the final day, the drill instructor had set up a special challenge. Targets at extreme range and windy conditions for those who had qualified expert. Morgan, the DI had called, using her maiden name. You're up. Sarah had stepped to the firing line, aware of a grizzled older Marine watching from behind mirrored sunglasses. She had ignored him, focusing on the targets. Wind gusting from the left, distance just over 600 meters, at the edge of the M4's effective range. She had made her calculations silently, adjusted her stance, and fired 5 rounds in rapid succession. Through the spotting scope, the DI confirmed all 5 had struck center mass. Again, the older Marine had said, stepping forward. But this time, aim for the head. The DI had looked surprised, but nodded. You heard Master Sergeant Wilson. Headshots. Sarah had adjusted her aim, calculating the slightly different ballistic trajectory. 5 more shots, 5 hits. After the other recruits left, Wilson had approached her. You weren't breathing properly, he said without preamble, and your stance was 8 degrees off optimal for the wind conditions. Sarah had stiffened. I hit all the targets. Yes, Wilson agreed. Despite your mistakes, imagine what you could do if you eliminated them. He had handed her a card with a phone number. When you finish basic, call me. I'm looking for someone who can do the impossible. The memory faded as the canal curved sharply eastward, the current growing stronger. Ahead, Sarah could see the ocean, gray waves crashing against the breakwater that protected the canal outlet. She cut the engine, letting momentum carry the Zodiac to a small maintenance platform near where the canal emptied into the sea. From here, she would proceed on foot. The hurricane's outer bands had fully engulfed the coast with wind speeds approaching 60 miles. Rain fell in blinding sheets, and occasional debris flew through the air. Branches, trash, anything not tied down. Sarah donned her ghillie suit, the specialized fabric designed to break up her human outline while shedding water. The Barrett case was secured across her back, its weight familiar and oddly comforting. She oriented herself using the compass built into her tactical watch, then began moving north along the coastline toward the shipyard. The terrain was challenging, a mixture of sand dunes, marshy lowlands, and occasional stands of wind-bent pines. The hurricane pushed seawater inland, flooding low areas and forcing Sarah to adjust her route repeatedly. After 30 minutes of grueling progress, Sarah reached a ridgeline that offered her first view of the shipyard. Through her binoculars, she studied the complex, now partially obscured by sheets of rain. Three main warehouse buildings loomed like dark sentinels against the gray sky. Between them, a central loading area provided open ground, a potential kill zone if the SEAL team entered without knowledge of the ambush. Movement caught her eye. Armed men taking positions on the warehouse roofs despite the dangerous wind conditions. She counted at least 12, with more inside the structures based on shadows moving past windows. Their weapons weren't the typical AK-47s of common insurgents, but included what appeared to be heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenade launchers. This was a well-equipped, disciplined force. As she worked her way closer, Sarah froze at the sight of a familiar face through her high-powered optics. Michael Blackwood, the colonel's son, was directing operations, moving with the unmistakable confidence of command. Sarah's stomach tightened. 3 years ago, Michael had been stationed at the same FOB in Afghanistan where Wilson had died. Sarah continued forward, using natural depressions in the terrain for cover. When she reached the final ridge overlooking the shipyard, approximately 800 meters from the central warehouse, she found what she was looking for: an abandoned water tower that would provide both elevation and concealment. Climbing in hurricane conditions was treacherous. Twice, powerful gusts nearly tore her from the rusted ladder. But Sarah persevered, reaching the maintenance platform that circled the tank. A small equipment shed provided partial shelter from the wind and an excellent vantage point over the shipyard complex. Sarah set up her position with methodical precision Wilson had drilled into her. First, the shooting mat secured to prevent movement. Then the Barrett assembled with practiced efficiency despite the howling wind and pelting rain. She established her firing data book, recording wind speed, direction, temperature, barometric pressure, and humidity. Through her scope, she conducted a detailed survey of the area. The enemy forces were more numerous than initially estimated, at least 25 combatants strategically positioned throughout the complex. They had established interlocking fields of fire that would catch anyone entering the central area in devastating crossfire. Then she saw them. SEAL Team Delta moving cautiously along the southern approach to the shipyard. Despite the weather, they maintained perfect tactical formation, unaware they were minutes away from walking into a carefully prepared trap. Sarah recognized Commander Reynolds leading the column, followed by 8 other operators. They were outnumbered nearly 3-1, with the enemy holding superior positions and heavy weapons. Her old injury chose that moment to flare, a searing pain behind her right eye, momentarily blurring her vision. Sarah reached for the medication Barrett had given her, swallowing it dry. She couldn't afford weakness now. Lives depended on her. She brought her eye to the scope, focusing on the nearest enemy sniper positioned on the eastern warehouse roof. The wind howled around her, gusting unpredictably as the hurricane intensified. Rain pelted the Barrett's barrel, each drop a potential deviation factor for the bullet's path. Sarah opened Wilson's notebook, turning to a dog-eared page where he had recorded his observations about shooting in extreme weather. In hurricane conditions, wind patterns become chaotic but not random. Look for the rhythm within the chaos. Time your shot between the gusts. She studied the wind indicators, flags, rain patterns, debris movement. The hurricane was creating swirling vortices around the buildings, making conventional wind calculation impossible. But Sarah saw what others could not: the subtle patterns within the storm's fury. An RPG team emerged from the northern warehouse, moving into position to target the approaching SEALs. Sarah tracked them, calculating range, wind, and bullet drop. The leader carried the launcher while his partner shouldered additional rockets. The decision crystallized in her mind with cold clarity. If she took the shot, there would be no going back. Her career, her anonymity, potentially her freedom, all would be forfeit. But if she did nothing, good men would die. Sarah remembered her promise to Wilson as he lay dying in her arms. Our people, no matter what. She exhaled slowly, found the space between her heartbeats, and squeezed the trigger. The Barrett roared, its massive report swallowed by the hurricane's fury. Through her scope, Sarah watched the RPG gunner collapse, the 50 caliber round finding its mark despite the impossible conditions. Before his partner could react, she chambered another round and fired again. Second target down. The shipyard erupted into confusion. Armed men scrambled for cover, unable to determine where the shots had come from. The SEAL team, alerted by the gunfire, took defensive positions behind shipping containers at the yard's perimeter. Sarah shifted her aim to the sniper on the eastern warehouse roof, the most immediate threat to the SEAL's position. Distance, 823 meters. Crosswind gusting between 45 and 65 miles per hour. Driving rain reducing visibility and affecting ballistics, an impossible shot by any conventional standard. She made the calculation, adjusting for all variables, then waited for the momentary lull between wind gusts. The Barrett thundered again. The sniper dropped below. Sarah worked methodically through priority targets. Anyone with crew-served weapons, anyone targeting the SEAL team's position, anyone attempting to coordinate the remaining enemy forces. Each shot required completely new calculations as the chaotic wind patterns shifted constantly. Through her scope, she caught glimpses of the SEAL team responding to the sudden advantage. Reynolds was directing a controlled advance, using her cover fire to move from the shipping containers toward the southern warehouse. The radio she had tuned to their frequency crackled. "Unknown shooter, this is SEAL Team Delta. Identify yourself." Sarah remained silent, already acquiring her next target, a machine gunner setting up on the western warehouse roof. She fired twice in rapid succession, eliminating both the gunner and his assistant. The storm intensified around her, the water tower's metal structure groaning under the assault of hurricane-force winds. Rain drove horizontally, stinging her exposed skin, but Sarah remained focused. Her world narrowed to the view through her scope and the calculations in her mind. Suddenly, a deafening metallic screech cut through the storm's roar. The platform beneath her tilted alarmingly as decades-old bolts, weakened by coastal corrosion and tested by hurricane-force winds, began to fail. Sarah grabbed her rifle and pack, securing them quickly as the structure swayed. The ladder she had used to ascend was now dangling uselessly, torn from its moorings. Below, the battle continued. The SEAL team had secured the southern warehouse but was taking fire from the main building. Sarah estimated they still faced at least 12 hostiles, including several in fortified positions. The water tower gave another tortured groan. Metal tore free as hurricane-force winds finally overcame the weakened structure. Sarah grabbed her rifle and pack and abandoned her position as the platform began to collapse beneath her. She scrambled toward the tank itself, finding handholds on access panels and maintenance fittings. The entire tower was coming apart around her, decades of coastal corrosion giving way to the storm's fury. Sarah climbed, fought, descended where necessary, using every skill Wilson had taught her about moving through chaotic environments. When the tower finally collapsed completely, Sarah was already on the ground, rolling clear of the falling debris. The noise was swallowed by the hurricane and the ongoing gunfire from the warehouse. She lay for a moment in the mud, rain pelting her face, body aching from the impact. But there was no time to recover. The battle wasn't over, and she needed to find a new position. Sarah forced herself to her feet, checked her rifle for damage, and began moving through the storm toward the shipyard's eastern perimeter. The hurricane had reached nearly full strength, the eye wall approaching the coast. Debris flew through the air, pieces of metal roofing, branches, unidentifiable objects torn free by the wind's incredible force. She fought her way to an abandoned guard shack that offered protection from the wind and a clear view of the main warehouse. Through the rain-streaked window, she could see flashes of gunfire inside. The SEAL team had penetrated the building, but was still engaged with the remaining hostiles. Sarah set up her final position, using the guard desk to stabilize her rifle. Her ammunition was running low, just 5 rounds remaining in the current magazine with one spare. She would have to make each shot count. Suddenly, 3 armed men appeared outside the guard shack, moving in a search pattern. Sarah drew her sidearm, the familiar weight of the Beretta steady in her hand. The first man was less than 10 meters away when he spotted her. Sarah fired twice, center mass. He went down without a sound, the hurricane swallowing the report of her pistol. The other 2 reacted immediately, diving for cover and returning fire. Bullets pinged off the concrete walls of the guard shack. Sarah remained motionless, controlling her breathing as Wilson had taught her. When outnumbered, patience becomes your greatest weapon. Let them make the first mistake. One of the men attempted to maneuver to her flank, exposing himself momentarily. Sarah's shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Her follow-up found his chest, and he collapsed into the mud. The third man was more cautious, maintaining his position behind an overturned cart. Sarah reached into her pocket, retrieving a flashbang grenade. She pulled the pin, counted 2 seconds, then tossed it toward the hidden man. The detonation was lost in a thunderclap, but the disorienting effect worked as intended. The man staggered from his position, temporarily blinded and deafened. Sarah's shot was merciful, clean and quick. She collected their radio, scanning frequencies until she found their command channel. Through broken transmissions, she heard Michael Blackwood's voice. "Find the sniper. Whoever's been decimating us needs to be eliminated now." Sarah returned to her firing position at the window, surveying the battlefield. The SEAL team had established a defensive perimeter in the southern warehouse. One man was receiving medical attention. Martinez, she guessed, while the others covered all approaches. Reynolds was consulting with another operator, likely planning their next move. She tuned to the SEAL team's frequency. "Delta Actual, this is Overwatch. South building is secure, but you have multiple hostiles in the main warehouse preparing to counterattack. Over." A moment of silence, then Reynolds' cautious reply. "Unidentified Overwatch, we appreciate the assistance. Who am I speaking with?" "Someone who keeps promises," Sarah replied. "You have approximately 12 hostiles remaining, concentrated in the main warehouse. Heavy weapons on the second floor, northwest corner." Through her scope, she could see Reynolds processing this information, then turning to the tall operator beside him. "This must be Jake, Barrett's godson." They conferred briefly before Reynolds responded. "Copy that, Overwatch. Any chance of closer support? We have a man down and limited ammunition." Sarah weighed her options. The storm had momentarily lessened as the hurricane's eye approached. They might have a brief window of relative calm before the back wall hit with even greater fury. "Moving to your position," she decided. "South entrance, 2 minutes. Hold your fire." Sarah gathered her equipment, leaving behind anything non-essential to reduce weight. The Barrett was strapped securely across her back as she moved through the storm toward the southern warehouse. The rain had subsided slightly, but the wind remained dangerous, carrying debris that could be lethal at high velocity. She approached the warehouse cautiously, aware that the SEALs would be on high alert. "SEAL Team Delta," she called from outside the doorway. "Overwatch approaching from the east, alone." "Advance and be recognized," Reynolds' voice responded. Sarah stepped into the doorway, hands visible, the Barrett slung across her back. The entire SEAL team had weapons trained on her, expressions ranging from suspicion to disbelief. A tall operator with a distinctive scar across his jawline lowered his weapon first. "No way," he breathed. "Ghost?" Reynolds looked between them, recognition dawning on his face. "Ghost? The ghost? I thought that was just a legend." Sarah moved further into the warehouse, assessing the situation. Martinez had a gunshot wound to the shoulder, being treated by the team's medic. The others showed various minor injuries, but all were combat effective. The situation is worse than you know, she said, keeping her voice low. The man leading the hostile force is Michael Blackwood. Blackwood? Jake repeated. As in Colonel Blackwood's son? Sarah nodded grimly. This wasn't a random encounter. You were led into an ambush. Reynolds' expression hardened. How do you know this? Because Wilson and I were led into a similar ambush in Afghanistan 3 years ago, Sarah replied. Wilson didn't make it, and Colonel Blackwood buried the investigation. The SEALs exchanged glances, processing this information. Reynolds finally spoke. So what's the play? We're still outnumbered, with a hurricane bearing down on us, and no extraction until the eye passes. Sarah laid out the situation. Extraction helicopter will attempt approach when the eye reaches us, approximately 20 minutes from now. We'll have a window of relative calm, maybe 15 minutes before the back wall hits. We need to secure the landing zone and neutralize any threats to the aircraft. And how do we do that? Thompson asked. Sarah met Jake's eyes. Your godfather sends his regards. Jake's expression shifted from surprise to determination. Barrett sent you? He tried official channels first, Sarah explained. Blackwood blocked him. Reynolds studied her for a moment, then nodded decisively. All right, Ghost, what's your plan? The hurricane's fury suddenly diminished as the eye wall passed over. The howling wind dropped to a low moan, and the driving rain lessened to a drizzle. In the distance, a faint rhythmic thumping grew steadily louder. Helicopter rotors. Sarah and Jake had taken position in an abandoned crane approximately 100 meters from the designated landing zone. Through her scope, Sarah surveyed the main warehouse where Michael Blackwood had consolidated his remaining forces. She could see them preparing for a final stand, knowing the SEAL team would attempt evacuation during the hurricane's eye. I count 8 tangos with direct lines of fire to the LZ, Sarah reported. 3 priority targets with crew-served weapons. Jake, serving as her spotter, confirmed the assessment. Wind dropping to 15 memory variable direction. Range to primary target, 643 meters. The helicopter sound grew louder, less than 2 minutes out. Sarah lined up her first shot, calculating wind and distance despite the rapidly changing conditions as the hurricane's eye approached. The Barrett roared 3 times in rapid succession, each round finding its target with unerring precision. The crew-served weapons fell silent, their operators eliminated. Move now! Reynolds' voice came through the radio. The SEAL team emerged from the southern warehouse, moving in perfect tactical formation toward the LZ. Williams and Thompson provided covering fire, while Reynolds and Johnson supported Martinez between them. Sarah continued methodical fire, eliminating any hostile who presented a threat to either the approaching helicopter or the SEAL team on the ground. 6 more shots, 6 more threats neutralized. Then she spotted him, Michael Blackwood, emerging onto the main warehouse roof with what appeared to be a Stinger missile launcher. He was preparing to target the approaching helicopter. Priority target, warehouse roof, Sarah called to Jake. Blackwood with surface-to-air missile. Jake spotted him through his binoculars. Take the shot. Sarah aligned the crosshairs, calculating the minimal wind drift. Range, 643 meters. Clean shot, no environmental complications. She began to apply pressure to the trigger. Suddenly, the crane beneath them shuddered violently. The hurricane-weakened structure was beginning to fail. Sarah maintained her focus, refusing to be distracted from the critical shot. The Barrett roared one final time. Through her scope, Sarah watched as Blackwood collapsed, the missile launcher falling unfired beside him. Target down, she reported, already breaking down her position as the crane tilted alarmingly. We need to move. The helicopter appeared through the thinning rain, the eye of the hurricane now directly above them. The aircraft approached the LZ where the SEAL team had established security. Sarah and Jake began their descent, moving as quickly as safety allowed on the unstable structure. They were halfway down when Sarah heard a sound that froze her blood, the unmistakable mechanical click of a grenade pin being pulled. She looked down to see a figure at the base of the crane, one of Blackwood's men, previously undetected, preparing to throw a grenade at the vulnerable helicopter. No time to bring the Barrett to bear. No angle for Jake to take a shot. Only one option remained. Sarah drew her sidearm and jumped, launching herself from the crane in a controlled fall toward the attacker, 15 meters below. She fired twice during her descent, both rounds finding their target. The man collapsed, the grenade falling from his lifeless hand. Sarah hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Pain exploded through her left ankle, a sprain at minimum, possibly a fracture. The grenade lay 5 meters away, its pin removed, the spoon no longer secured. "Grenade!" she shouted, knowing she had seconds at most. Sarah lunged forward despite the pain, grabbed the grenade, and hurled it as far as possible toward an empty area of the shipyard. The explosion came 2 seconds later, close enough that she felt the concussive force, but far enough to cause no damage to personnel or the helicopter. Jake was beside her instantly, helping her to her feet. "Can you walk?" Sarah tested her weight on the injured ankle, pain shooting up her leg. "I can move," she said through gritted teeth. They made their way to the helicopter, Sarah leaning heavily on Jake for support. Reynolds met them at the aircraft, shouting over the rotor noise. "That was one hell of a jump." "Ghost!" Sarah nodded acknowledgement as Jake helped her aboard. The entire team was loaded, Martinez secured on a medical litter. As the helicopter lifted off, Sarah looked back at the shipyard. The eye of the hurricane was passing over, creating an eerie calm. The destruction was evident everywhere. Collapsed buildings, flooding, debris scattered across the landscape. In the distance, the back wall of the hurricane approached, darker and more ominous than the leading edge. They were escaping just in time. Jake secured himself in the seat beside her, leaning close to speak over the aircraft noise. "You know you just destroyed your career, right? Unauthorized departure during hurricane lockdown, unsanctioned combat operation." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Some things matter more." "Wilson would be proud," Jake said simply. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of grief and guilt that had been tightening for 3 years. She reached up, feeling the dog tag still hanging around her neck. A promise kept. The helicopter banked sharply as it approached the base, fighting against the hurricane's back wall, now slamming into the coastline. Through the rain-lashed windows, Sarah could see the base below. Buildings partially damaged, debris scattered across parade grounds, emergency vehicles with flashing lights. 30 seconds, the pilot shouted over the intercom. "Hang on, it's going to be rough." Reynolds secured his harness and then turned to Sarah. "Ghost, once we land, you'll need to make some decisions very quickly." Sarah met his gaze, understanding perfectly. Her unauthorized departure from base during hurricane lockdown was serious enough. The combat operations she'd conducted would bring scrutiny from the highest levels. "I stand by my actions, Commander," she replied simply. The helicopter descended through violent wind shears, the pilot demonstrating extraordinary skill to maintain control. They touched down hard on the base's primary helipad, skids slamming against concrete with bone-jarring force. Medical personnel rushed forward despite the hurricane conditions, stretchers ready for Martinez and the other wounded. Sarah moved to exit with Jake's assistance, her ankle barely supporting weight now that the adrenaline was fading. And standing on the helipad, facing the storm with grim determination, was Colonel Richard Blackwood. Even through the driving rain, Sarah could see the fury etched into his features. Beside him stood Captain Barrett, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. Sarah straightened, refusing to show weakness as she stepped forward to face what was coming. Jake moved to support her, but she shook her head slightly. This was her moment to stand alone. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell," Blackwood's voice cut through the storm with cold precision. You are hereby relieved of duty pending investigation for gross insubordination, unauthorized departure from base during emergency protocols, and misappropriation of military equipment. Sarah said nothing, her face impassive. Rain streamed down her features, mingling with the blood and grime from the battle. Colonel, Reynolds interjected, stepping forward, Sergeant Mitchell's actions saved the lives of my entire team. We walked into a trap, and without her intervention, your report will be taken, Commander, Blackwood interrupted sharply. But it doesn't change the facts. Sergeant Mitchell abandoned her post during a Category 4 hurricane against direct orders. Sarah finally spoke, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Sir, I respectfully suggest we discuss this somewhere more private. Something in her tone made Blackwood pause. His eyes narrowed slightly before he nodded. Base security will escort you to my office once you've received medical attention. As Blackwood turned to leave, Sarah called after him. Colonel. When he turned back, she continued, her voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. You should know, sir, your son is dead. The color drained from Blackwood's face. For a moment, he seemed unable to process her words. Then fury replaced shock. What did you say? Michael Blackwood was commanding the hostile force that ambushed SEAL Team Delta, Sarah stated flatly. He had a Stinger missile and was preparing to shoot down our extraction helicopter. I eliminated the threat. Blackwood staggered slightly as though physically struck. You're lying, he whispered, but his eyes betrayed him. Not shock at the accusation, but fear that his secret was exposed. Sir, Reynolds confirmed, stepping forward. We can confirm Michael Blackwood was leading the hostile force. Multiple members of my team made visual identification. Blackwood's expression hardened into something dangerous. Sergeant Mitchell, you will surrender all weapons and equipment immediately. Security will escort you to the brig, not the infirmary. Colonel Blackwood, Barrett's voice cut in, stepping forward. As senior advisor, I must insist on medical treatment for all personnel, including Sergeant Mitchell. Blackwood looked as though he might argue, but too many witnesses surrounded them now. The helicopter crew, medical personnel, the entire SEAL team. Fine, he spat. Treat her injuries, but she remains under guard at all times. As Blackwood strode away through the storm, Sarah felt Barrett's steady hand on her arm, supporting her. Let's get you inside, he said quietly. Jake appeared on her other side. We've got your back, he murmured. All of us do. Sarah allowed herself to be led toward the medical building, acutely aware of the security personnel following close behind. The confrontation with Blackwood had gone exactly as she'd expected. The colonel was now cornered, his son's involvement exposed, his own complicity soon to follow. A dangerous man with nothing left to lose. The real battle was just beginning. The base medical center buzzed with activity as casualties from the hurricane were treated alongside the returning SEAL team. Sarah sat on an examination table, her tactical gear and weapons already confiscated, as Barrett carefully wrapped her injured ankle. Grade 2 sprain, he pronounced. You're lucky it's not broken, considering that jump Davis told me about. Sarah nodded, her mind elsewhere. Through the window, she could see 2 armed MPs standing outside the door, Blackwood taking no chances on her slipping away again. William, she said quietly, using Barrett's first name, I need you to secure something for me before Blackwood has my quarters searched. Barrett continued working on her ankle, his expression neutral for the benefit of anyone watching. What am I looking for? Wilson's notebook, hidden compartment under the desk in my quarters. The combination is his date of birth. And what will I find in this notebook? Sarah met his gaze directly. Everything. My suspicions about Blackwood. The intelligence I collected before the mission. And Wilson's final mission notes from Afghanistan. Barrett's hands paused momentarily. The mission where he died. Sarah nodded once. Wilson suspected a traitor was feeding information to insurgents. high level. He was getting close to identifying them when we were compromised. Understanding dawned on Barrett's face. You think Blackwood was the one Wilson was investigating? I know he was, Sarah replied, her voice hardening. And now his son is dead, and I'm the only one who knows the full story. Barrett finished wrapping her ankle, then handed her a set of crutches. Use these. Stay off that ankle for at least 72 hours. He raised his voice slightly for the benefit of anyone listening, then added in a near whisper, I'll find the notebook. What else? Tell Reynolds to secure the Barrett. It's evidence. Wilson's personal weapon. Blackwood will try to have it lost in processing. Barrett nodded almost imperceptibly, then gestured to the MPs waiting outside. Sergeant Mitchell is cleared for transport. Keep her weight off that ankle. The administration building showed signs of the hurricane's fury. Broken windows hastily covered with plywood, water damage to ceiling tiles, emergency generators providing minimal lighting. The MPs led Sarah to a small conference room that had been repurposed as an interview space. A digital recorder sat on the table alongside a stack of official forms. Wait here, Sergeant, one of the MPs instructed. Colonel Blackwood will be with you shortly. Sarah was left alone, the door closing firmly behind her. She took the opportunity to assess the room. One door, two windows overlooking the base perimeter. Standard office furniture. The security cameras in the upper corners appeared to be offline, likely due to the power outage. 15 minutes passed before the door opened again. Colonel Blackwood entered alone, his face a mask of cold fury. He stood across the table, not bothering to sit. Let me be perfectly clear, Mitchell, he began, his voice dangerously quiet. You will never see the outside of a military prison again. I'm charging you with desertion, insubordination, and the murder of my son. Your son was commanding a terrorist force attacking U.S. Special Operations personnel, Sarah replied evenly, and you sent them into that ambush knowingly. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. Prove it. Your word against mine. A decorated officer versus a burned-out sniper with brain damage deemed unfit for combat operations. People tend to believe physical evidence, Sarah countered. Account numbers, transfer records, names, dates. Wilson was thorough. Blackwood's hand moved to his sidearm, resting in its holster. Where is Wilson's evidence? Where are his records? Not in my quarters, if that's what you're thinking, Sarah replied. Not anymore. You're bluffing, Blackwood said, but uncertainty clouded his features. The building shook suddenly as a massive gust from the hurricane's back wall slammed into it. The lights flickered, then failed completely, plunging the room into darkness. Emergency lighting activated seconds later, casting everything in a dim red glow. Blackwood drew his weapon, aiming directly at Sarah. Tell me where the records are, or I swear I'll shoot you right now and claim you attacked me. With what? Sarah asked calmly, gesturing to her injured ankle and the crutches leaning against the table. How exactly would I have attacked you, sir? Before Blackwood could respond, the door burst open. Commander Reynolds stood in the doorway, his expression changing instantly from professional determination to cold fury as he took in the scene. Blackwood aiming a weapon at an injured, unarmed soldier. Colonel Blackwood, Reynolds said, his voice dangerously quiet, I suggest you lower your weapon immediately. Blackwood kept the gun trained on Sarah. This doesn't concern you, Commander. Leave now. I'm afraid I can't do that, sir, Reynolds replied, not moving. I've just received some very interesting information from Captain Barrett regarding Sergeant Mitchell's allegations. Information that necessitated my immediate attention. Barrett, Blackwood's face paled slightly. What information? Reynolds stepped fully into the room, positioning himself between Blackwood and Sarah. Master Sergeant Wilson's personal records, sir. Specifically his notes regarding a significant corruption scheme he uncovered before his death. Notes that explicitly name you as the primary military facilitator. Blackwood's hand trembled slightly. the weapon now pointed at Reynolds. "You're lying. Barrett couldn't have—" "We found the notebook exactly where Sergeant Mitchell said it would be," Reynolds continued calmly, "along with supporting documentation Wilson had secured before his final mission. It's quite comprehensive." The building shook again as another powerful gust slammed into it. The emergency lights flickered ominously. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," Blackwood said, desperation creeping into his voice. "This goes beyond me, beyond all of us. There are people who will ensure this never sees the light of day." "Perhaps," Reynolds acknowledged, "but they'll have difficulty explaining why you murdered a decorated SEAL commander and a witness after your son was killed leading an attack on American forces." Blackwood's resolve visibly wavered, the weapon lowering slightly. For a moment, it seemed he might surrender. Then his expression hardened, a man with nothing left to lose. "If I'm going down," he snarled, raising the weapon again, "I'm taking you both with me." Sarah launched herself forward despite her injured ankle, driving her shoulder into Reynolds and knocking him aside as Blackwood fired. The bullet missed them both, embedding itself in the wall. Before Blackwood could fire again, the door burst open a second time. Jake and two other SEALs rushed in, weapons drawn. Blackwood swung toward them, but Jake was faster. His shot caught Blackwood in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon clattering to the floor. "Colonel Richard Blackwood," Jake announced formally as the other SEALs secured the wounded officer, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, treason, attempted murder, and about a dozen other charges I'll enjoy seeing listed at your court-martial." The shooting range at Fort Bragg echoed with the methodical rhythm of precision rifle fire. Sarah Mitchell stood at the firing line, watching a class of snipers in training prepare for qualification. Her ankle had healed completely, allowing her to demonstrate positions and techniques with the same fluid grace that had once earned her the call sign, Ghost. The Barrett M82A1 rested on its bipod before her, Wilson's customized weapon, now officially transferred to her possession following the completion of the NCIS investigation. Sarah had restored it to perfect condition, each component cleaned and maintained with reverent precision. Behind her, an instructor's voice carried across the range. "Remember what Staff Sergeant Mitchell taught you. In extreme conditions, find the pattern in the chaos, calculate everything, but trust your instincts when the moment comes." Sarah smiled slightly, hearing her own words echoed to a new generation of precision shooters. The past 3 months had brought dramatic changes to her life and career. Colonel Blackwood's conspiracy had been fully exposed, reaching as high as a 2-star general and involving millions in defense contracts. Multiple arrests had followed, with trials still ongoing. For Sarah personally, the most significant moment had been meeting Wilson's family, his wife Laura and teenage daughter Rebecca. Returning Wilson's dog tags to them had brought a measure of closure she hadn't realized she needed. Their gratitude upon learning the full story of his investigation and Sarah's role in completing it had been overwhelming. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell," a voice called, pulling her from her thoughts. A young Marine approached, clipboard in hand. "The Admiral is here for the demonstration." Sarah nodded, checking her rifle one final time. Today's event was significant, a demonstration of extreme long-range shooting for senior military leaders. In the aftermath of the Blackwood conspiracy, the importance of traditional sniper skills had been re-emphasized throughout the special operations community. As Sarah moved to the designated firing position, she spotted Captain Barrett and Commander Reynolds among the gathering of officers. They had become vocal advocates for her reinstatement to operational status, arguing that her hurricane operation demonstrated skills too valuable to waste in a purely instructional role. The range officer's voice came over the loudspeaker. "Today's demonstration will showcase extreme long-range precision fire under adverse conditions. Staff Sergeant Mitchell will engage targets at distances from 1,000 to 2,100 meters with variable wind conditions artificially created by our wind generators. Sarah settled behind her rifle, establishing her natural point of aim with practiced efficiency. The first target stood at 1,000 meters, a challenging but reasonable distance for an experienced sniper. The wind generators roared to life, creating a complex pattern of crosswinds designed to mimic natural conditions. Through her scope, Sarah studied the wind indicators, flags, grass movement, heat mirage patterns. She made her calculations, adjusted her scope, and fired. The shot struck dead center. The observers murmured appreciatively, but Sarah was already focused on the next challenge. Or 500 meters with stronger, more chaotic winds. Again, her shot found its mark with unerring precision. As she prepared for the final and most difficult shot, 2 hours 100 meters with hurricane-force variable winds, Sarah felt a familiar presence beside her. Jake had arrived to witness the demonstration, now kneeling as her spotter. "Just like old times," he murmured, setting up the spotting scope. "Wind call?" Sarah asked, focused on her breathing rhythm. Jake studied the conditions, making the complex calculations that had once been Wilson's responsibility. Right to left, varying between 15 and 40 mm, temperature 72 centigrade. Barometric pressure 30.12 and steady. Sarah processed these variables, making minute adjustments to her scope and position. The 2,100-meter shot represented the outer limits of the Barrett's effective range, a shot that most would consider nearly impossible under ideal conditions, let alone with artificial hurricane winds. The range fell silent as observers held their breath. Sarah found her center, slipping into the mental state Wilson had taught her, where time seemed to slow, where chaos resolved into pattern, where the impossible became possible. Between heartbeats, she squeezed the trigger. The Barrett roared. Long seconds passed as the bullet traveled its extreme trajectory. Then through her scope, Sarah saw the impact, dead center on the target. Applause erupted from the observers. Sarah rose from her position, accepting congratulations with quiet dignity. As the crowd dispersed, Reynolds approached with a tall, silver-haired admiral. "Sergeant Mitchell," Reynolds began, "allow me to introduce Admiral James Hargrove, Commander of Special Operations Command." Sarah came to attention, saluting crisply. "At ease, Sergeant," Hargrove replied, returning the salute. "That was the finest demonstration of precision shooting I've ever witnessed. Commander Reynolds has told me about your operation during the hurricane. Extraordinary." "Thank you, sir." "I understand you have been serving as an instructor these past months," Hargrove continued. "Reynolds here believes your skills are being underutilized." Sarah glanced at Reynolds, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "I enjoy teaching, sir," she replied carefully, "passing on what I've learned." "Admirable," Hargrove acknowledged, "but we have a new initiative that might interest you. A joint special operations unit focused on precision operations in extreme conditions. The hurricane incident demonstrated capabilities we didn't realize were possible." Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, but interest flickered in her eyes. "What role would I play in this unit, sir?" "Lead instructor initially," Hargrove explained, "eventually field operations commander. Building a team that can do what you did, operate with precision in conditions others consider impossible." The offer represented everything Sarah had once aspired to: operational command, elite status, the opportunity to build something unprecedented. Yet she hesitated, thoughts turning to her students, to Wilson's legacy, to promises kept and new ones made. "I'm honored by the offer, Admiral," she said finally, "but I believe I can best serve by splitting my time, developing this new unit while continuing to instruct at the Academy." Hargrove studied her thoughtfully, then nodded. Dedication to both the future and the foundation, Wilson chose his successor well. After the Admiral departed, Reynolds lingered. "You could have had a pure operational role," he observed. "Why stay with the instruction?" Sarah glanced back at the firing line, where her students were now practicing with renewed enthusiasm after witnessing her demonstration. Wilson didn't just teach me to shoot, she explained. He taught me to pass on knowledge, to build something lasting. Reynolds nodded, understanding. The ghost becomes the mentor. Not ghost anymore, Sarah corrected quietly. Just Sarah Mitchell, doing the job that needs doing. As Reynolds departed, Barrett approached, Wilson's old leather notebook in his hands. Sarah had given it to him for safekeeping after the investigation concluded. Too many memories, too many ghosts contained in its pages. Thought you might want this back, Barrett said, offering the worn volume, now that you're building something new. Sarah accepted the notebook, running her fingers over its weathered cover. Something new built on something proven, she corrected. Later that evening, alone in her quarters, Sarah opened the notebook to its final blank pages. For 3 years, she had maintained Wilson's tradition of recording everything: weather conditions, equipment specifications, shot details, a scientific approach to an art form. She began to write, not calculations this time, but philosophy. The lessons learned through fire and storm, through promises kept and justice served. Precision isn't just about hitting targets. It's about finding clarity in confusion, certainty in doubt, purpose in pain. The hurricane taught me that we are all defined not by the storms we endure, but by the precision with which we navigate them. Sarah closed the book, her thoughts turning to the future, to the unit she would build, to the students she would teach, to the legacy she would extend. Wilson had seen something in her that others missed, had shaped her into something extraordinary. Now it was her turn to do the same for others. The ghost had found her true purpose, not as a specter in the shadows, but as a beacon guiding others through their own tempests. Some promises transcended death, some legacies defied storms, and some heroes worked best in silence, finding purpose in precision when it mattered most.